The last thing I saw before I drove away that morning was my daughter's graduation cap sitting on the kitchen counter. Her name, Emily, was written across it in silver marker, surrounded by tiny stars she had drawn herself. I had promised her I would be in the front row, no matter what. Then my phone rang. It was my supervisor, telling me the hospital's maintenance crew had found a serious problem with the backup generator, and if I didn't come in, the repairs would be delayed until Monday. Normally, I would have said no. That day, I almost did. But there was something he didn't know, and something Emily didn't know either. For the past 3 months, I had been quietly working extra shifts because the small house we lived in was about to be taken from us. Her college acceptance had come with a tuition gap I couldn't cover, and I had already borrowed everything I could. I didn't want her choosing between school and keeping our home. So I worked nights, weekends, and every overtime hour they offered. I never told her. I wanted her graduation morning to be about her, not about the bills stacked inside my desk drawer. I drove to work that morning believing I could finish the emergency repair quickly and still make the ceremony. I was wrong. By 11:30, I was still inside the mechanical room, covered in dust and grease, watching the minutes disappear. I called Emily twice. Both times, it went to voicemail. Finally, I left a message. "Honey, I'm sorry. I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." When the generator finally came back online, it was nearly 2 in the afternoon. The ceremony had ended hours earlier. I sat alone in my truck outside the hospital and stared at the photo Emily had sent me that morning. She was standing in her blue gown, smiling beside the empty chair she had saved for me. I could barely breathe. That evening, when I got home, the house was silent. Her graduation flowers were on the table, already beginning to wilt. Emily came downstairs carrying her cap in one hand. She didn't yell. Somehow, that hurt worse. "You said you'd be there," she whispered. "I know. You always say you're trying." I looked at her and wanted to tell her everything. Instead, I said the worst possible thing. "Sometimes work has to come first." Her face changed immediately. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and walked back upstairs. I stood there alone, knowing I had just broken something I might not be able to fix. What I didn't know was that Emily had found an envelope in my truck that same night. And inside it was the reason I had missed her graduation. She opened it expecting another bill, but found a college payment receipt made in full. Beneath it was our mortgage receipt, both dated graduation morning. For the first time, she understood where I had really been all those hours. Emily stood in my kitchen holding that envelope for almost a full minute before she came upstairs. I was sitting at the edge of my bed, still wearing the same work clothes from the hospital, staring at the floor because I didn't trust myself to look at her. When she finally walked in, she didn't say anything. She placed the envelope on the dresser between us. "Dad," she said quietly, "what is this?" I knew there was no way around it anymore. "It's your tuition." She looked at the receipt again. "You paid this?" I nodded. "How?" I tried to smile, but it didn't work. "Overtime." Her eyes filled immediately. "How long?" I hesitated. "A few months." She stared at me as if I had suddenly become someone she didn't recognize. Then she picked up the mortgage receipt. "And this?" "That was to keep the house." Her voice broke. "You were going to lose the house?" I finally looked at her. "Not exactly. The bank had given us a deadline." She sat down beside me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I had asked myself that question every night. "Because you were supposed to graduate," I said. "You were supposed to look ahead, not look back at everything I couldn't afford." She shook her head. "I would have helped." "You already did," I told her. "You gave me 12 years of reasons to keep going." She started crying, and I pulled her into my arms. For a few seconds, it felt like we had finally found each other again. Then she pulled away. "But you still miss my graduation." I lowered my eyes. "I know. And you told me work came first." "That was wrong." She wiped her face. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" I had no good answer. Maybe pride? Maybe fear. Maybe I was so used to protecting her that I forgot she was old enough to protect me too. Then Emily noticed something else inside the envelope. A folded hospital document had slipped behind the payment receipt. She opened it, and her expression changed. "Dad, what is this?" I reached for it, but she moved it away. "It says you were at the hospital at 8:14 that morning." I nodded. "That's when the emergency started." She looked at the document again. "This says you were there for someone." I went silent. She looked at me carefully. "Who?" I could have lied. Instead, I finally told her the truth. The emergency generator wasn't the real reason I had stayed. Earlier that morning, one of the hospital's elderly patients had been trapped in a powerless wing during the outage. I had been the only maintenance worker who knew the backup system well enough to restore it manually. Leaving would have meant waiting for another crew to arrive. Emily stared at me, tears rolling down her cheeks. "So you stayed because someone needed you?" I nodded. "And because you needed your tuition paid?" She gave a small, broken laugh. "You really thought you had to save everyone by yourself?" I didn't answer. She leaned against my shoulder and whispered, "Dad, I didn't need a perfect father. I just needed you to let me know what you were carrying." The next morning, Emily woke me before sunrise. She was already dressed, holding 2 cups of coffee, and wearing the graduation gown I had missed seeing her receive. "Come with me," she said. I asked where, but she only smiled. We drove back to the hospital together. I thought she wanted to see where I had spent that terrible morning, but when we reached the maintenance entrance, she stopped me. "Dad, there's someone I want you to meet." Before I could ask who, an elderly man in a wheelchair came slowly toward us, pushed by a nurse. I recognized him immediately. His name was Mr. Harris. He had been the patient trapped in the darkened wing during the outage. I had never spoken to him after the emergency because he had been transferred to another floor. He looked at me for a moment, then smiled. "You're the man who stayed." I nodded. "I was doing my job." He shook his head. "No, you were doing more than that." Emily looked at me. "He remembered you." "Mr." Harris reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this after I learned your name." He handed it to me. It was a short thank you note. He explained that during the outage, he had been frightened because he was on oxygen and believed nobody could reach him. Then he heard my voice through the hallway door telling him to stay calm. I had kept talking to him while manually restarting the backup system. "You told me someone was coming," he said. "But nobody was coming. You were the someone." I swallowed hard. Emily squeezed my hand. Then Mr. Harris looked at her. "Your father missed your graduation because he was trying to make sure I lived long enough to see another morning." Emily's eyes filled with tears again. She turned toward me. "Why didn't you tell me that?" I smiled sadly. "Because I didn't want my sacrifice to become your burden." She hugged me so tightly that I nearly dropped the note. But the biggest surprise came when we returned home. Emily walked into the kitchen, opened her laptop, and showed me an email she had received from her college. She had been offered a paid campus position beginning in the fall. It wouldn't cover everything, but it would help. "You don't have to carry the whole thing anymore," she said. "We're a team." I stared at her, realizing how much I had underestimated the woman my little girl had become. For years, I thought being a good father meant shielding her from every hardship. That morning, I learned something different. Sometimes loving your child means trusting them enough to see the hard parts too. Emily reached across the table and took my hand. "Dad," she whispered, "I still wish you had been in that chair." I nodded, feeling the old pain return. "So do I." She smiled through her tears. "Then let's make sure you're in the next one." 3 months later, I was sitting in a small auditorium watching Emily walk across another stage. It wasn't her graduation this time. It was the orientation ceremony for the college program she had chosen, and somehow, that little event felt more important to me than anything I had ever attended. I sat in the front row, exactly where she had once saved me a seat. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the polite smile she had given me on graduation morning, but the smile I remembered from when she was 6 years old and used to run toward me after school. After the ceremony, she came over and handed me a small wooden frame. Inside was the photo from her high school graduation. She had changed one thing. In the empty chair beside her, she had placed a picture of me. Underneath it, she had written, "He was there, even when I couldn't see him." I had to look away for a moment. "You didn't have to do this," I said. She smiled. "I wanted to." Then she told me something I never expected. She had spoken to her college financial office and arranged a payment plan. She was also working part-time on campus. For the first time in years, I wasn't terrified every time a bill arrived in the mailbox. We kept our house, and I stopped taking every overtime shift I could get. I still worked hard, but I finally understood that being a father wasn't measured by how much exhaustion I could hide. A week later, Emily and I drove back to the hospital to visit Mr. Harris. His condition had improved, and he was preparing to move into assisted living near his daughter. Before we left, he pulled me aside. "You know what your daughter told me?" he asked. I shook my head. "She said you taught her that love isn't always about showing up at the exact moment people expect. Sometimes it's about doing something nobody will ever see." I smiled. "She said that?" "She did." He paused. "But she also said you need to stop trying to be a hero all by yourself." We both laughed. On the drive home, Emily reached over and rested her hand on my arm. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "If you ever have to miss something important again, promise me you'll tell me why." I looked at her and smiled. "I promise." She leaned against the window. "And I promise I'll listen." That was the real graduation I had missed, and the lesson I almost learned too late. I had spent years believing that protecting my daughter meant keeping every struggle hidden behind a locked door. But love doesn't become stronger because we hide the truth. Sometimes the greatest gift a father can give his child is the courage to say, "I'm struggling," and trust that she won't walk away. I missed one graduation. I will always regret that. But Emily taught me something I will carry for the rest of my life. Being present isn't only about occupying a chair. It's about making sure the person you love never has to wonder whether they matter.